He was richer than Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos combined. Yet he started with nothing but a criminal for a father and a mind that worked in terrifying silence. To discover how this poor boy became the most ruthless and most generous man in modern history, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss this unbelievable story. In this video, you're not just going to listen to another story. You are about to walk through the life of a man who was at one time richer than Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos combined. Yes, you heard that right. If John D. Rockefeller's great wealth was adjusted for today's money, he would be worth over $400 billion. That's more than the richest people alive today. But he didn't start with wealth. He was born into a poor family in a small, simple house. He had a father who lied, who cheated, and who would often disappear for months. He did not have a perfect childhood, but he had something much more powerful than money. He had an unshakable focus, a terrifying silence, and a mind that studied everything around him. He didn't talk much. He just watched. He calculated. And he worked like a man possessed. Some people called him the most ruthless man in America, but others called him the greatest philanthropist, the greatest giver the world has ever seen. So how did a poor boy with nothing become the richest man the world has ever known? In this story, you will learn everything. We will walk through his childhood and his struggles. We will see how he built the giant oil empire that powered modern America. And we will watch as he gives away half of his fortune to change the world. Most importantly, you will learn how to improve your English through this real-life story. You'll learn powerful new words, emotional ways of speaking, and life-changing lessons, all in simple and clear English. By the end of this story, you will not only know the life of Rockefeller, but you will also feel motivated to transform your own life. So please grab your headphones, sit back, and let's begin the story of the boy who was born in silence and died as the king of oil. Chapter 1. John D. Rockefeller's Early Life. John Davidson Rockefeller was born on a summer day, July 8, 1839, in a small farmhouse in Richford, New York, here in the USA. He wasn't born into a world of luxury. His family was poor, and his home was very simple. He didn't wear expensive clothes or play with fancy toys. His toys were the dirt, the rocks, and the feeling of hope in his heart. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was not a kind or simple man. In fact, people in the town had a special name for him. They called him Devil Bill. Why? Because he was a liar, a cheater, and a trickster. He traveled from town to town selling fake medicine and pretending to be a doctor. He would disappear from home for weeks and sometimes even months, leaving his family with very little. He cheated people out of their money, and he even cheated on his wife, John's mother. He once told his young son, "John, cheat before you get cheated." That sentence stayed in John's mind for his entire life. But here is the interesting part. Instead of becoming like his father, John did the opposite. He studied him. He watched every lie, every trick, every scam, and deep inside his quiet mind, he made a decision. I will never be weak, he thought. I will never depend on anyone else. While his father was a wild and dangerous man, John's mother was the complete opposite. Her name was Eliza Davidson Rockefeller, and she was calm, disciplined, and very religious. She was a strict woman, but she was also fair. In her house, every dollar was counted carefully. Every minute of the day had a purpose. She taught her children the importance of hard work, prayer, and self-control. She had a saying, "Willful waste brings woeful want." This means if you waste your time or your money today, one day, you will suffer for it. Eliza would sometimes give young John a single cent a penny and say, "Go to the store and buy bread. Bring back the change, and remember how hard money is to earn." John never ever forgot that lesson. From the young age of 7, he was learning about business 1 cent at a time. John had 5 brothers and sisters, but sadly not all of them survived. The house was often filled with work chores, silence, and a quiet fear of when their father might return. The children all worked on the farm. John milked the cows, he planted crops in the fields, and he helped his mother with whatever she needed. He didn't complain. Even as a child, he worked with a kind of military discipline. While the other kids were outside playing games, John was often inside writing in a little book. He called it his ledger. In it, he tracked every penny he earned and spent. He counted his coins, and he wrote down his dreams. John was always quiet. He didn't smile very much. He didn't get into fights or shout. He simply watched everyone and everything, and he waited. The neighbors would sometimes say, "That boy, there's something scary about his calm." And they were right. When John was 14 years old, the family moved to Ohio. His father continued to disappear, making life very unstable and difficult for them all. So John, who was only a teenager, was forced to become the man of the house. He started taking care of his mother and his siblings. He found small jobs to earn money. He raised turkeys and sold them. He sold potatoes from the garden and candy to other children. And he saved every single penny. One day in his journal, young John wrote down a goal. He wrote, "I want to make $100,000, and I want to live 100 years." In the 1800s, $100,000 was a huge, almost impossible dream. But Rockefeller believed in dreams that were backed by discipline. In 1855, when John was just 16 years old, he put on his only clean shirt and walked into the city of Cleveland. He went from door to door, from office to office, looking for a job. He had no resume, no special contacts, just courage and that powerful silence. He was rejected by more than 15 offices. People said no again and again. But on September 26, 1855, a company finally said yes. They hired him. The company was called Hewitt & Tuttle, a commission merchant. That day, September 26th, became a special day for him. He later called it his job day. He celebrated it every year for the rest of his life, almost like a birthday. Why? Because it was the day that the poor farm boy took his very first step toward becoming the richest man in history. He didn't just work at his new job. He worked like a soldier. He arrived at the office before the sun came up, and he left after the sun went down. He learned bookkeeping, the art of tracking money, like a machine. He never wasted a single minute. He carried a small black notebook everywhere, and in it, he wrote down every dollar he spent, every expense, and every lesson he learned. Even as a teenager, he believed, "God gave me money because I was careful with it." By the time he was 20 years old, he was already loaning money to other people with interest. He had saved $1,000, which was a very large amount of money in those days. But what's more important is what he had built inside himself. He had built a mind that was sharper and more focused than most men twice his age. Chapter 2. The Beginning of an Empire. John D. Rockefeller had saved his first $1,000. He had mastered the art of bookkeeping. He worked with the discipline of a perfect machine. But deep inside, he felt something else calling to him. He didn't just want to earn a salary from someone else. He wanted control. He wanted to build something permanent, something that no storm could ever destroy. And then, something appeared. A dark, sticky liquid that was bubbling up from the earth. It was oil. In the 1850s, most people didn't think much of oil. They called it rock oil. It was messy, it was useless, and it was smelly. But in 1859, a man named Edwin Drake drilled the first successful oil well in Pennsylvania. And suddenly, the world changed. This oil could be turned into something called kerosene. Kerosene could be used for lamps. In a world that had no electricity, this meant light for every home. And when John Rockefeller looked at that oil, he didn't just see light. He saw a massive opportunity. In 1863, when Rockefeller was just 24 years old, he partnered with a man named Samuel Andrews. Andrews was a chemist, and he knew how to refine the oil, how to clean it, and turn it into good kerosene. Rockefeller invested his money, and together they created a company called Clark Andrews and Company. But very soon, he had a problem. His other partners, the Clark brothers, did not have the same vision as he did. They were impulsive. They spent money carelessly. They didn't think about the long-term future. And Rockefeller, well, he was calculating every single move. He hated waste. He wanted everything to be precise. So he made a very bold decision. At only 25 years old, Rockefeller bought out the Clark brothers. He paid them $72,500, which was a huge amount of money at the time. Many people who heard about it thought he was crazy. But Rockefeller didn't even blink. He was calm and certain. Now the company was his. He renamed it Rockefeller and Andrews. It was the first time his own name stood almost alone on a business. Soon, that name would become the most feared name in the entire oil industry. Rockefeller was different from the other businessmen of his time. They shouted. He whispered. They guessed. He calculated. They took big risks. He worked to remove risk. He studied every single step of the oil business. Where do we get the oil? How do we refine it as cheaply as possible? How can we package it safely? How can we transport it? And how can we sell it better than anyone else? He had two secret weapons. The first was efficiency. He believed that every single drop of oil from the barrel should be used completely. No waste. Even the gasoline which other companies threw away as garbage, Rockefeller found a use for it and sold it. His second secret weapon was a motto: trust in God and work like the devil. Every morning, he read his Bible. But during the day, he worked like a tireless machine. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in systems. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller took his next giant leap. He formed a new company and he called it the Standard Oil Company. Why Standard? Because he wanted to create a product that people could always trust a standard of quality and excellence. At that time, oil could be very dangerous. It caused fires, explosions, and sickness. But Rockefeller worked to create safe, clean, and affordable kerosene. And very soon, every home in America wanted it. But success always attracts enemies. Many small oil companies tried to fight him. They charged lower prices for their oil. They made big promises to customers. Rockefeller didn't shout back. He simply cut his own prices lower and lower and lower until they could not compete anymore and their businesses collapsed. Then he would quietly buy their company. Sometimes he would send his men to visit a competitor, and they would say very calmly, "You can sell your company to us now for a fair price, or we will drive you out of business later." This became known as the Rockefeller method. This is a point in the story where we see his mind at work. He was building something incredible, something that would bring light to the country. But his methods were tough, and many people were hurt by them. So I have a question for you. What do you think about this? Was Rockefeller being a brilliant businessman, or was he being a cruel bully? There is no easy answer. I would be really interested to hear your thoughts about this in the comments below. Now this is where things get even more dangerous and legendary. In 1871, Rockefeller made a secret deal with the major railroad companies. The railroads were essential because they transported the oil all across the country. So Rockefeller went to them and said, "If I promise to give you a lot of oil to move every single day, will you give me a special discount? A price that is cheaper than anyone else gets." The railroads agreed. So now Rockefeller paid less money to move his oil, but all of his competitors still had to pay the full price. This, of course, made his kerosene cheaper to sell, and their kerosene more expensive. It was a genius move. It was ruthless. And at the time, it was totally legal. His competitors screamed that it was unfair, but they could not stop him. By 1872, his company had grown so powerful that he launched a secret plan. It was later called the Cleveland Massacre. He sent his agents to every small oil refiner in the city of Cleveland, and one by one they gave them the same message: "Sell your company to us, or we will destroy you." Within just a few months, he had bought 22 of the 26 competing refineries in the city. It wasn't really a war. It was a surgical business domination. And all of this power, all of this fear, came from a man who never shouted. He never went to parties. He never gambled. He never wasted time. He ate simple meals. He avoided the media and newspapers. He stayed focused like a laser. He once said, "Do not many of us who fail to achieve big things fail because we lack concentration? The art of concentrating the mind on the thing to be done at the proper time and to the exclusion of everything else." Rockefeller didn't work alone. He surrounded himself with men who were brilliant, loyal, and just as silent as he was. He trained them to think like machines, just like him. They all wore simple suits, they avoided the headlines, and they moved like shadows. Together, they were called the Oil Trust, and they were quietly taking over America. But trouble was coming. By the late 1870s, Rockefeller was becoming too powerful. He controlled too many refineries, too many railroads. There was too much silence, and regular people, began to ask questions. Who gave this one man so much power? Is he building a monopoly? The public didn't like it. The government didn't like it. And the media began to attack. Chapter 3. War against Rockefeller. The Empire versus the People. By the end of the 1870s, John D. Rockefeller was no longer just a successful businessman. He had become a mysterious, invisible force that controlled the lifeblood of America oil. Every lamp that burned in every house, every train that shipped goods across the country, every new factory that was built. They were all powered by his company, Standard Oil. He didn't just sell kerosene. He sold light movement and energy. But behind that quiet success, something dark was beginning to grow. People had never seen a man like Rockefeller before. He never gave interviews to newspapers. He never smiled in public photographs. He stayed silent. He worked in the shadows, and he just kept growing richer and richer. This made people curious at first. Then it made them nervous. And finally, it made them angry. They asked, "Who is this man who controls our country's oil? Why can no one compete with him? Is he above the law?" Newspapers started giving him names like the Oil King, the Octopus, because his company's arms reached everywhere, and the silent killer of competition. He had everything he could want: power, money, and influence. But now he had enemies, and the first major attack would come from a place where he least expected it. In the late 1890s, a young journalist named Ida Tarbell started to investigate Standard Oil, why she had a very personal reason. Her own father had been destroyed by Rockefeller's business tactics. He had owned a small oil business in Pennsylvania until one day Rockefeller's agents came with their quiet threat: "Sell to us, or you will disappear." He lost everything. Ida never forgot what happened to her family. So she spent years of her life collecting evidence. She interviewed former employees who were afraid to speak. She studied every secret deal that Rockefeller had ever made. And in 1904, she published a book called The History of the Standard Oil Company. It was not just a book, it was an explosion. In her writing, Ida revealed to the world how Rockefeller made his secret deals with the railroads. She exposed how he crushed small businesses with his price wars. She showed how he used fake companies to spy on his rivals and how he threatened owners to sell their businesses or face ruin. Her most powerful line was this: Mr. Rockefeller has systematically played with loaded dice. This means he never played a fair game. He always controlled the rules. He had designed the game so that only he could win. The public was shocked. Suddenly, Rockefeller wasn't seen as a silent genius anymore. To many, he was the face of corporate greed. By now, his company had swallowed more than 90% of America's entire oil business. He owned the refineries, the pipelines, the railroads, the barrels, the stations. He owned everything. So in 1890, the United States government passed a new law. It was called the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was a new weapon designed to stop monopolies, which are giant companies that destroy all of their competition. But for many years, this law was only words on paper. It wasn't used. Until finally, the pressure from the public and the media became too strong for the government to ignore. By 1906, the U.S. government had one clear goal: break up Standard Oil. The empire that Rockefeller built was now facing its biggest war, but his enemies were about to learn that he was a very difficult man to defeat. If you want to see what happens next in this incredible battle, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next part of this story. As the media, the public, and the government all turned against him, what did Rockefeller do? He did not speak. He did not fight back in the newspapers. He did not even appear in court. He let his lawyers handle all the noise while he kept doing what he always did: grow stronger in silence. But deep inside, he knew a great storm was coming. So he started to prepare his empire for war. At this point, Rockefeller had created one of the most complicated business structures in history. Standard Oil was no longer just one single company. It was a maze, a network of smaller companies holding companies' secret partnerships and regional branches. Each one was legally separate on paper, but they were all secretly controlled by Rockefeller's board of directors. This made it very, very hard for the government to prove anything. They had to spend years just collecting evidence. But finally, in 1909, the U.S. Supreme Court heard the case. It was one of the biggest legal battles in all of American history. And in May of 1911, the court gave its final decision. Standard Oil, they declared, is a monopoly, and it must be broken into smaller companies. It looked like a victory for the government, a defeat for Rockefeller. Or so they thought. Standard Oil was split into 34 smaller separate companies. You may have heard of some of them: ExxonMobil, Chevron, Amoco. But here is the genius of Rockefeller. He owned shares or parts of all of them. So when the big company was separated, the stock value of all the small companies skyrocketed. They became incredibly valuable. And John D. Rockefeller became even richer than before. Some people say his personal wealth doubled after the breakup. After the court case, Rockefeller finally became more visible to the public, and the reactions were mixed. Some people saw him as a hero of capitalism, the man who built modern industry. Others saw him as a robber baron, a thief who crushed the weak and played God. But nobody could ignore him. Even as an old man, when he walked outside, crowds would gather. Some people waved to him. Some people even threw stones at him. Instead of fighting back, Rockefeller began to do something new. He began to give away his great fortune. He did it quietly, carefully, and systematically. He donated millions of dollars to universities like the University of Chicago. He gave money for medical research. He supported black colleges in the South. He funded scientific discoveries. He created the Rockefeller Foundation, which still exists today and does good work all over the world. It helped to develop vaccines, build schools, and support global education. He once said, "God gave me my money, but it is my duty to use it wisely to help humanity." And slowly, people began to see a different side of him. The boy who had once counted every single penny for a loaf of bread was now giving away millions of dollars to save lives. The year was 1911. The Supreme Court had just ordered the breakup of his empire. A normal businessman would have panicked. Most would feel humiliated, angry, or defeated. But John D. Rockefeller, he just smiled. He stayed calm. He quietly walked away from the battlefield that he once ruled. But this was not the end. This was a new beginning, not as the king of oil, but as a man, a husband, a father, a man with faith, family, and an enormous mission to give back more than anyone ever had before. Chapter 4. A Quiet Life, a Lasting Legacy. Behind every great empire there is a home, and behind the most powerful man in business there was a family that very few people ever saw. Rockefeller had been married to a woman named Laura Celestia Spellman since 1864. Their marriage lasted for over 50 years until her death in 1915. But it was not the type of marriage filled with public romance or fame. It was built on something much deeper: discipline, religion, and mutual respect. Laura was a quiet, firm, and extremely moral woman. She was raised in an abolitionist family, which means her family fought against slavery in America. She believed in equality education and living a modest, simple life. While John was out ruling the oil industry, she was ruling the household, not with anger, but with great intelligence and structure. She managed the family budget. She made sure that their children stayed humble even as they became rich. And she constantly reminded John, "God gave you this money, but it is not yours to waste." John loved Laura very deeply, though he showed it in his own quiet way. He wrote her letters, he remembered small details about her, and he trusted her decisions completely. They prayed together every single day. They discussed world events, and they supported each other's missions in life. Even when he became the richest man alive, he never bought her expensive diamonds or fancy jewelry. Laura once said, "Too many women think love is measured in gold, but true love is built in silence." Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was powerful. And after she died in 1915, Rockefeller was never quite the same. He never remarried. He would often sit alone in his garden reading her old letters, sometimes crying quietly. The world had known him as the man who crushed empires. But in those moments, he was just a husband missing his best friend. John and Laura had 5 children, but only 4 of them survived past childhood. Let's get to know them a little. Their first child was Elizabeth, or Bessie. She was quiet and reserved, very close to her mother. She married a theology student and lived a very private life away from the media or business. She supported causes like education and women's health, but she did it quietly. Rockefeller loved her gentle spirit and often said she reminded him of his own mother. Their second daughter, Alice, sadly died when she was just a child. This left a deep scar on the family. Laura became even more protective of her other children after that. John, who so rarely showed his emotions, did not speak for 2 days after Alice passed away. He never spoke publicly about her, but for the rest of his life he donated thousands of dollars to children's hospitals every year in her name. Their third daughter was Alta. She married a cousin of President Theodore Roosevelt. Alta was intelligent, graceful, and she supported schools for women. She didn't enjoy the spotlight, but she was very active in charity work. John respected her independence. He once said, "Alta has the wisdom of 10 men and the humility of a child." Fourth was Edith. She married into the McCormick family, who owned a giant manufacturing empire. She became one of the most powerful women in Chicago society. She loved and supported art music and public health. She was elegant, stylish, and a little bit rebellious. Rockefeller once joked, "Edith spends more on one dress than I did starting my first oil refinery." But secretly, he was very proud of her strength. And finally, there was John D. Rockefeller Jr., his only son. This was the son who would have to carry the family legacy. Rockefeller trained him like a soldier from a young age. Jr. was taught how to save money, how to pray, and how to give back. When he was just 11 years old, Jr. had to keep a record of every single penny he spent. At age 16, he was working in the Standard Oil Company, but not in a fancy office. He was sweeping floors and carrying heavy boxes. Rockefeller believed in earning everything. He once told his son, "I will not give you an easy life. I will give you a strong character." Jr. would later go on to build the famous Rockefeller Center in New York City, donate thousands of acres of land for America's national parks, and continue his father's mission of global philanthropy. Once he retired, Rockefeller lived on a grand estate in New York called Kikuit. But it wasn't a palace filled with wild parties and luxury. He lived a very simple life. He woke up early. He read his Bible every single morning. He took long walks in his garden. He ate simple food, oatmeal bread, and vegetables. Every day, he wrote letters of gratitude to people who had helped him in his life. He enjoyed playing golf, and he often gave dimes 10-cent coins to the children he met, smiling as they thanked him. When someone asked him why he gave them dimes, he said, "Because a dime might teach them the value of money." By 1913, he had already donated millions of dollars through his personal charity. But now he wanted to create something bigger, something permanent, something global. So he launched the Rockefeller Foundation, which became one of the most powerful philanthropic institutions in history. Its mission was to promote the well-being of humanity throughout the world. Through this foundation, he helped to get rid of a terrible disease called hookworm in the American South. He supported the medical research that led to major vaccines. He funded universities and public schools all around the world. He built libraries and research centers. He even helped to fund the creation of the United Nations. By the time he died, Rockefeller had donated over $500 million. In today's money, that would be worth over $10 billion. He once said, "Making money is a gift. Giving it away wisely is a responsibility." As he entered his 80s and 90s, Rockefeller began to write down his personal thoughts and reflections. He didn't care about the newspaper headlines anymore. He didn't miss the business meetings. He wanted to be remembered, not for how much money he made, but for how he lived his life. He wrote letters to his grandchildren, telling them to avoid pride, to love silence, to believe in God, and to use money as a tool, not as a goal. Even as his body grew old and weak, his mind remained as sharp as ever. It's amazing to think about his journey from building an empire to giving so much of it away. His story has a powerful message about wealth and responsibility. If this story or its message has touched you, perhaps you could share it with a friend or a family member who might find it inspiring. Chapter 5. The Final Goodbye. It was the spring of 1937. The world had changed so much. Airplanes were flying across the oceans. Cars filled the streets of the cities. Radios connected voices across entire continents. America had survived the Great Depression. and in a quiet corner of Ormond Beach, Florida, inside a simple, peaceful home called The Casements, a 98-year-old man sat near a window looking out at the sunrise. That man was John Davidson Rockefeller, the boy who once had to beg for his first job, the boy who sold turkeys on dusty roads, the man who built an empire from barrels of oil and then gave away half of it. Now he sat alone. He was old, frail, and wrinkled, but his spirit was still as sharp as steel. He had outlived his dear wife, many of his business competitors, and even some of his own children. But now even he knew that the end was near. In his last years, Rockefeller no longer traveled. He spent his days writing letters, reading the Bible, playing a little golf with his doctor, and taking short, slow walks. Every morning, he would sit in his garden for hours just watching the flowers open, watching the birds fly, and watching the world carry on without needing him. He often whispered to his assistant, "God has been good to me, much better than I deserve." He was no longer the feared oil king. He was now just a man who had seen nearly a century of change and had shaped so much of it. In his final weeks, he had private talks with the people who were closest to him, mostly his son John Jr., his grandchildren, and a few long-trusted workers. He told them, "Don't chase power, chase purpose. When you have more than you need, build bridges, not walls. The greatest wealth is peace of mind." One day he called his young grandson to his side. He handed him a small coin, a single dime. The child smiled. Rockefeller whispered, "That's how it all started for me. With one dime. Don't waste it." In early May of 1937, he grew weaker. His vision began to fade. He slept for longer, and he stopped writing. The doctors said his heart was slowing down, but his mind, they said, stayed alert. On May 23, 1937, at exactly 4:05 in the morning, in complete and total silence, John D. Rockefeller took his final breath. He was 98 years, 10 months, and 14 days old. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1.4 billion. But that was in 1937. If we adjust that amount for today's money, comparing it to the size of the U.S. economy, his fortune would be equal to over $400 billion today. That means he was richer than Elon Musk, richer than Jeff Bezos, richer than any human who is alive today. To help you understand how rich he really was. At one point, Rockefeller's companies controlled 1.5% of the entire U.S. economy. No single person has ever reached that level of economic influence again. Despite his incredible status, Rockefeller did not want a grand fancy funeral. He had requested a simple Christian service with only his family and close friends. No politicians, no press. He was buried at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio, under a simple headstone. It read only, "John D. Rockefeller, 1839–1937. No title, no ego, just a name. And behind that name, an unforgettable story." So now we come to the final question. What did John D. Rockefeller leave behind? It wasn't just oil. It wasn't just money or buildings. He left a blueprint, a plan for ambition, discipline, faith, and legacy. We can see his impact in a few key areas. First, he redefined what is possible. He showed the world that you don't need to be born to rich parents to become great. He showed that you don't need to shout to win. You don't need luck if you have a strategy. He turned a dying town into the center of the oil universe. He turned waste into wealth. He turned silence into strength. Second, he proved that discipline beats talent. Rockefeller wasn't the smartest man, or the strongest, or the most charming. But he was the most focused, the most disciplined, and the most patient. He tracked every penny. He planned every move. He avoided chaos and stayed silent until it was the perfect time to strike. Third, he gave more than almost anyone in history. And he didn't just give money to feel good. He gave money to solve problems. Diseases like hookworm and yellow fever, the lack of schools, the need for scientific research. He attacked these problems with the same focused mindset he used to build Standard Oil. He believed that giving without a system is wasteful, but giving with wisdom is eternal. Today, thousands of schools, hospitals, and lives still exist because he gave. Fourth, he created a dynasty, a family legacy without chaos. Most rich families fall apart after 1 or 2 generations, but not the Rockefellers. Why? Because he trained his children to think about the long term, to live with a purpose, to avoid greed, and to serve others. Even today, over 200 living members of the Rockefeller family work in medicine, education, finance, environmental protection, and global health. They aren't celebrities, but they all carry the same mission: build, give, and serve. And finally, he taught the world the power of stillness. In a loud world, he stayed quiet. In a chaotic world, he stayed calm. While other people chased noise, he chased clarity. He mastered the art of disappearing while still dominating. He didn't waste his time. He didn't need applause. He didn't care for trends. He lived his life slowly, but he left a legacy that still moves the world forever. And that is where our story of John D. Rockefeller concludes. This one was a real journey, wasn't it? From a poor boy in New York to the most powerful man in the world. I am so curious to hear your take on it all. What were your final thoughts as we reach the end? Do you have any lingering questions about why a character did what they did, or about his family? Please leave all your opinions, your theories, and your questions below in the comments. I truly love reading them and building this conversation with all of you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Stay strong, stay focused, and go build your own legacy. I will see you in the next video.